Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to our next episode of LionHeart Talks. I'm Melissa Gough-Rundle and I'm Head of Development, and today I am joined by the wonderful Roy Albert. Roy is one of our ambassadors and he has an awful lot of experience around the APC journey. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over so Roy can introduce himself. Roy.
Yes, good afternoon, Melissa. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon to everyone. And my name is Roy Albert, as you've already mentioned. I am a technical lead, and I work for the Valuation Office Agency based in Bristol. I took up the ambassadorial role with Lionheart in 2020, so it was near enough soon after my qualification. And since taking up that role, I've always tried my best to endeavour to sort of work with people in terms of the APC journey or those who have already completed the APC journey and working with the other ambassadors with Lionheart themselves. I'm also an assessor with the RICS, more of a chair at the moment, which wasn't something I wanted to start with, but I've grown into that role. And for the last 2 years, more of a chair role instead of an assessor, and every now and again, I just jump in to do an assessor role if and when required. And apart from that, I'm also a counselor and a supervisor within the Valuation Office Agency for APC candidates as well.
Roy, it sounds like you've got an awful lot going on at the moment. Bless you. Um, it is great to talk to you today because I know you have a wealth of experience on this topic around the APC journey, but I really wanted to take you right back to the beginning with a quite a big question here. So, what made you want to become an RICS professional in the first place?
It's a bit of a two-pronged sort of answer to this. Part of it was accidental. And the second part, I did have a bit of a passion for the architectural sort of buildings in England. So, as you probably know, or probably might not know, I was born and raised in the Caribbean. So, in terms of the buildings we have in the Caribbean compared to what we have in England, it's a vast difference. There's much more variety, there's much more architecture in terms of how it's built. And the glimpse of the buildings I got whilst in the Caribbean was more or less on the television or on catalogs. And then moving to England, it sort of gave me that bigger insight as to how beautiful buildings can be. However, the accidental part of it was I began working for the rent service, which was more or less valuations for housing benefits tenants. And growing into that role, it sort of gave me even a bigger interest to get involved with the real estate and valuation as a whole. And then we sort of joined the Valuation Office Agency somewhere back in 2009, and my interest grew even more. And that was based on the fact that with the Valuation Office Agency, they're one of the biggest employers of chartered surveyors. And I wanted to be part of that. I understood the professionalism in terms of valuation, the professionalism in terms of ethics and moral conduct, and the way you carry yourself out, and what we call the gold standard of valuation. So becoming a professional for me at that point of time, it wasn't just about career enhancement. It was about sort of putting my sort of passion into reality. And then whatever happens from there would be sort of a bonus for me.
That is amazing. That's really, really great because you were working at the time that you started your APC journey, weren't you? And I just wondered if you could give us a bit of a flavour of what it was like to go and start that journey and how it went for you.
I mean, a lot has changed since I started that journey. And what I mean by that, there's much more sort of progression or different career paths in terms of getting in to become a chartered surveyor. So I started at a level four valuation way back in 2010, I believe. And it was what we call the tech RICS or diploma. And at that point, I did not have a degree. So getting to become a chartered surveyor was a bit of a more difficult sort of journey from that point. There was no other avenue for me at that point. Luckily, with the Valuation Office Agency, they eventually had a bit of liaison with the RICS, where we started the apprenticeship program. And if I put that in a summary, the apprenticeship is you work and you learn at the same time. So the degree or going to university was 4 years, and halfway after 2 years, I began my APC. So then what happens at the end of the 4 years, you sort of finish both together, your degree and your APC sort of journey. So luckily for me, with the apprenticeship, it came at the right time, albeit my journey started a long time ago. But I reflect now and I think doing the tech RICS or the valuation diploma sort of gave me a better foundation of what to come in the future. Not saying that without that I would not progress, but it sort of prepared me by the time I pick up the apprenticeship program. So it was a long journey for me. And part of that journey was born of the fact that there was less sort of avenue to become chartered without having a degree at that point.
Mm. So it sounds like you did it over quite a condensed period of time. It was very intense. How did you find that journey, though? I mean, how are you managing to get the work-life balance just right?
I wouldn't say I'm the most sort of organized person to begin with. However, going on a journey like this, you need to start thinking what are your priorities and how do I become more organized. Another massive word for me is procrastination. If you're a procrastinator, then it becomes even more difficult. And with doing an apprenticeship program, particularly where you have family, you want to have a social life, you want to be able to progress with your university, then 2 years in, you've got to do your APC, sort of your diary. It becomes a lot, as you could probably imagine. And I believe the one thing that helps you progress is the support. You need to have the right support around you, i.e., it could be your family, it could be your supervisor, your counselor. They are the people who's going to sort of lend into that sort of journey for yourself. Of course, a lot of it begins with yourself because it's your own career, it's your own journey. But the best way to look at it is I had to realize what I want to achieve. And in order to achieve that, I had to have some sort of organizational skills in place. And part of my organization, I would say at the early part of things was I'm not one to take a lot of notes. I don't like writing a lot. I'm more of a listener and I'm better with pictures. However, to sort of help me with that, I picked up other programs on my own accord. So like writing skills, communication skills outside of the parameters of the APC in order to sort of help me with my organizational skills. So a lot of how you prepare yourself, it's not about what is presented to you as a syllabus. It's about what you think outside of the syllabus would help you with things like communication, writing skills, and organizational skills. For my personal opinion, I think working within the valuation office agency, I have the right people around me to sort of pick up where my gaps are and how I should close these gaps up. I did heard of the Lionheart prior to becoming a chartered surveyor. I remember when I looked at other little programs that I could get involved in, I had to start to realize, well, what do I get from like an organization from Lionheart? What do they give that could help me sort of progress? Because it's important. Networking is an important part of your progression, but a part of it is trying to get the right sort of organization to help you within that journey as well.
That's really interesting because what I'm hearing from you, Roy, is that there was quite a lot of skill that you had to learn in terms of going through this process. You recognized that there was a few gaps in the way you organize yourself really, and having had lots of conversations with APC candidates and hearing what they've gone through, being organized is one of the key things. But if it doesn't come naturally to you, it's not always an easy
No.
thing to learn, is it? And especially when you've got other things
Right.
going on and you're working, you've got family, and a social life, if that still occurs, then it can be quite difficult. But I'm also hearing as well, you saw quite early on the importance of having a support network. And,
Yes.
that might be in the shape of your mentor, your counsellors, Lionheart, your family. And I suppose my question to you is, do you think that's just as important as those kind of practical skills that you pick up on the APC journey? Is having that support network there just as important to get in place?
I would say potentially even more important. I remember, as I said, we go back a few years. there was a piece about help with work-life balance, which I can remember now with the picture. There was a scale, a balancing scale on the LionHeart website, and it spoke about the members of the LionHeart who could help you sort of redress the balance, or how you get that balance in place. If you do not have that balance, your progression will stall. And I found that out sometime, I think it was 3 years into my apprenticeship, where everything became sometimes too much for me. I'm trying to get to that point where I think I'm prepared to sit my interview, which again presents its own sort of nervous problems. And I always say to candidates now when I do either consultations or APC mocks with them, I say to them, my job here is not to take that nerves away. It's to minimize that nerve. It's an hour where you sit in an interview and there's a level of uncertainty. So you're going to feel that bit of nerve. And it's a good thing because it shows there is a matter of, I want to achieve this. You're not going into that with a laissez-faire attitude. And for me, it came after that 3 years time where it became a bit really, really traumatic for me in terms of what am I doing? What is this going to look like? How do I take myself away from work and have that social sort of time to sort of release my mental sort of aptitude? So having that support and that bit of networking, that's when I think it's even more important than having that technical ability, because that technical ability will not be able to be triggered when you have that mental sort of block or that mental hurdle. So, going back to your question, I think it could be just as important, if not more important, to have that work life balance in place in order to sort of give you that mental aptitude to sort of progress.
Because you're in this position now, you're able to look back. You'll be able to look at it quite differently and say to students that are going through this process now, this is what happened to me. This is the pitfalls that I had. So be really mindful of making sure that you have got your support network and that you are taking care of yourself. I think it can be probably quite easy to get very sort of embroiled in what it is that they're doing. It's all about the qualification, it's all about the work. And it might be quite difficult for individual candidates to actually lift themselves out of that and remember that they still have a family around them, that they still have the ability to kind of tap into their social network as well. Do you think it's really important that they focus on that? Because I can imagine getting very focused on the qualification might cause them to perhaps pull away from more social activity. And should they actually be looking for more social activity to balance it out?
Yes, absolutely. And it's an important point you raise. It's about if you're working towards that goal, whereby you want to achieve becoming a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and in your mind, you're thinking about career enhancement, you're thinking about financial status, you're thinking about your family, yourself, and how that's going to impact your family, it can become full on and it can become a case of that's all I need to do. I need to work, I need to study, I need to work, I need to study. And it becomes on repeat. But there's two parts to this. One of that important part is sometimes your body and your mind will stop you. It will tell you that something is not right. Just very briefly, unfortunately, in 2016, I suffered a near cardiac arrest whilst playing football. In my mind, it wasn't related to stress or my lifestyle per se. It was hereditary from my dad. And I end up being in the hospital. And that happened whilst playing football. So I'm doing this degree. I'm doing my football as a social part of my life. And it turned out in the end that football or activities actually helped me physically, health wise, because it made me a bit stronger. So what it sort of presented to me is whilst that happened whilst playing football, football was the reason why it gave me that sort of time span where I could live through not getting the cardiac arrest, if that makes sense. So then it brings everything together to say that actually living an active life will also help you put everything together in that work-life balance. But I'll go back to what I said from the start. You need to have the right people around you to say, right, just stop. And I always say, don't study hard, study smart. You could try to put everything in on the table at the same time, particularly dealing with competencies. But importantly, I think you need to understand each competency, and understanding each competency comes with a skill. And that skill is not doing everything at the same time, but doing everything individually, i.e., your inspection, your valuation. Do I do this as one? Do I do this separately? It helps you refocus on what each one of them presents itself. And then actually part of that is trying to understand how that's going to look like when you sat in an interview answering the questions. So all that practice becomes a reality, that practice of how do I revise, how do I balance work life balance. When you put all that together and you sat down in your interview, everything comes to reality. When the questions come to you, how do you carry out your inspections, how do you ensure there's no hazards or there's any risks around you, then you can take that breath and then answer the questions. Because a lot of time, Melissa, I say sometimes you ask candidates questions and they sometimes answer how they think they want to answer instead of the actual question. And part of that is exercising the brain. And you cannot exercise the brain where you have to be constantly revising. You have to take that break. You've got to take that natural break. And you've got to get used to taking that break.
That's really helpful, and thank you for sharing that story, Roy. I know that you contributed to a blog, didn't you, on the LionHeart website that
Did.
talks really specifically about the story, and I really recommend people go and have a quick read through that because it's a fantastic story, and you really did have quite a few challenges on your APC journey, but you came through and you came through successfully, which is great. I also remember one part of your story, which I loved, was the fact that you said you were doing your presentation and you do it to yourself in the mirror, you do it to actually anybody that was around that would listen. And I thought that was a lovely way of you just, whether that was family members, pets, your own reflection, you would always just keep practice, practice, practice. It's lovely. So I imagine that probably helped you once you went into your examination, then you kind of knew that you had it off pat because you practiced it so many times.
That's right. And I think when you think of the APC itself, and I don't want to take the APC away from the senior route, which is sort of similar but different in terms of what the interview looks like. So for the APC for interview, your first 10 minutes is your case study. Whereas on the senior route, your first 10 minutes is about talking about yourself, your journey. Why do you want to become a surveyor? For both of them, you get that first 10 minutes to yourself. And what I think is if you have a good 10 minutes of a presentation where you finished your a presentation just in the 10 minutes, you were very fluent in terms of how you present yourself, good eye contact, you're well prepared. I think that sets you up really well for the remainder of that 50 minutes of your interview. Many times you see candidates get flustered if they sort of prematurely finish their presentation, or they wasn't very good in terms of presenting. And it's sort of mentally it have that hold on you that, oh, 50, I got 50 minutes left of this. And I always compare it to doing your driving lesson. You go for your driving test, and your first 5 minutes, you probably made a mistake. It sort of throws you for the remainder of the test. It's sort of that similar sort of connotations for me. So I think what really helps is once you practice that case study, you nail it down to the point where you can near enough present it without looking at any slides. It sets you up really well for that hour's interview. Aside from that, I have never been to an interview, be it as a chair, as an assessor, or even my own interview, where the panel wasn't very helpful. We are trying to help you. We're trying to support you. We're trying to make the room as comfortable as it can possibly be, particularly being it, albeit online. But I think if you need to nail everything, I've spoken to so many people who have got referred, and a lot of them said to me, "Oh, my case study, my presentation wasn't good, and it sort of threw me for the remainder of the interview." That's why it's critical. The first impression, you nail it. And I will say now, a lot of times when we sort of doing the conclusion to the interview, the panel will say, "Oh, that was a really good presentation." It's the first impression. Really good presentation. Oh, very succinct, very easy to follow. What that does, it's already grabbed our attention. And that's why I think it's important that whatever you do, get that nailed on and get that almost to the point of perfection.
That's such good advice, Roy. So if you were talking to an APC candidate now and you knew that they're incredibly nervous about going into that examination, do you think a lot of it is around their content? Do you think they actually fall down on the content, or do you think it's the way that they actually present themselves? Do you think it's more the nerves that get the better of them? They've probably got a very good presentation, but it's them themselves that get nervous, and then perhaps they feel like they've messed it up a bit.
Yes, I think it's the nerves, but critically, I think what needs to happen is you need to do more mocks. Now, I know candidates would say, even at the VOA, well, I don't want to do a mock with this person or that person. They're very strict. They're very knowledgeable. They're very experienced. They might catch me out. That's a good thing. That's the purpose of a mock. The purpose of a mock is not whether you would pass or whether you would get referred. The purpose of a mock is to see where the gaps are and send you away to revise, to close that gap. You need to make yourself uncomfortable, and it's better to be uncomfortable in a mock than uncomfortable in the real interview. And you've got to look at it that way. If you've done a mock and you've left that mock thinking, oh, that was dreadful, you will take that now than go into the real interview and after that interview saying that was dreadful. I remember my first mock, it went terribly. And the feedback was really positive. And the feedback was we could see the nerves. Calm yourself. This is your first mock, probably expected in terms of the way you came across. But go away. This is your gaps. This is how you answer the questions. Don't get your questions muddled in terms of what we're asking you and what you're answering. And it taught you not just the technical aspects of the interview, but the soft skills. How you prepare for a question. You get asked a question, don't jump to the answer, take it in and then answer the question. So I think a lot of what we do and a lot of how we sort of program the interview, it's not just your technical ability of answering how to do certain things, but that soft skills, your communication skills. It's not about saying the big words or saying the words that we're looking for, but it's just telling the panel how you did what you did from the level one, level two, and the level three competency in terms of how you give advice. I remember as well, Melissa, in terms of how we come across, candidates need to be very constructive in terms of how they approach their examples they gave in their summary of experience. And what I mean by that is a brief example would be you carry out inspection. Did you encounter any risk at this particular property? And the candidate may say, no, I haven't, I didn't. It doesn't mean that you exempted from getting asked, well, what if there was a risk? How would you approach that particular inspection? And the risk or hazard could be an empty building, for example. How would you address or approach that inspection differently from a property that's occupied? So it's about understanding the whole surrounding of that particular question of, say, health and safety. You might not have encountered any health and safety issues, but what if you did? How would you approach it? And it's very important that candidates understand that what the panel is trying to get from you is your competency, i.e., the APC sort of journey.
Having that insight from you is probably quite valuable, because I remember that we've spoken about this before when we first started talking about doing this podcast, and you said really what the assessors want to do is make that individual candidate feel comfortable, and they want them to pass. They want to bring the best out of
Mhm,
that individual. And I think if
mhm.
perhaps candidates realise that they're not trying to fail them, they're not trying to catch them out, they're not trying to put them in a difficult situation, I think that would be incredibly helpful. And I think you've probably encapsulated that as well. It's actually we're there to help you pass and get that qualification, which is fantastic. We were talking about practice. We were talking about keep going over the presentation again and again until it's almost, in your memory, saying it in your sleep. And I think it would be good to share that Lionheart will help candidates in that process. So you can go to work colleagues, you can go to your mentors and supporters to take you through your presentation and look at it from a technical perspective. But Lionheart is there to help you with those soft skills that you mentioned and try and put people at their ease when they're really struggling with nerves and they're really struggling with how they're going to come across to the panel. One of our support team will help take you through your presentation, and they're not worried about the content and what your slides look like necessarily. It's how you conduct yourself. Have you remembered to take a breath? Are you talking without until you're almost blue in the face, or are you struggling to get your point across and just coming across as really nervous? And they'll help you with that. They will deconstruct what it is that you're doing in your presentation and really help you to relax. And I know we've had some wonderful responses from APC candidates. In fact, I think it's probably one of our most popular support items through the support team, that when they do speak to APC candidates, it helps them enormously with this process, which is really very, very nerve-wracking. It's very stressful. It's a lot of pressure in the lives of everyone that's taking that exam. So to have that ability to speak to Lionheart and let them take you through that process and really help you to relax, you can be almost the best version of yourselves. And you go into that exam, it's you've got that part of it just licked. You're quite calm. You can do it. You've got a little bit of nerves around what's going on, but it's enough to get you through the presentation. But you're not overly concerned. You can talk about the content. You don't have to worry too much about your nerves. Roy, I think you have been involved with Lionheart for a long time now, through various parts of your career. You're a fantastic ambassador. And I think hopefully you would say that if anybody's struggling with the stress of the process, with how to get on top of your nerves when it comes to the presentation, I think you would probably say that reach out to Lionheart and have that conversation. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I was given a candidate by Lionheart. I believe it was the middle of December. It was short notice, and I say that because even after short notice, people like myself and other ambassadors, we're here to help. Particularly us going through that journey ourselves, we understand the stress, we understand the nerves, and we understand some of the hurdles that come along with that. Everyone had their own story. But I remember speaking to this candidate, and what I understood from the conversation was the level of uncertainty that she had in terms of what to expect at the interview. And she said that's not the first time she's approached Lionheart, and she was very pleased in terms of positive feedback of what she got from there. And that's why I say it's very important that if you've gone through the journey yourself, sometimes I find as well there's some candidates who have been referred. Now they're a chartered surveyor, they become the perfect person to speak to when the candidate comes to them and said, "Well, I was referred, how do I deal with that disappointment? What does that disappointment feel like?" And different people have a different sort of way of emotions of how they deal with disappointment. But what I got from this candidate was not the knowledge per se, in terms of what they know, is the uncertainty of the questions that they will get asked. Simply put, the questions that the panel asks you is based on your submission. We won't ask you anything outside of that. In fact, all the training we do for the assessors, be it as a chair or be it as a panel, it's the same. It's about the questions about your assessment in terms of your summary of experience. That's what we want to know about. We've had some stories of people might say, "Well, yes, but I didn't do that and I got asked it." And when I look at the question, it's the same thing I said to you earlier in terms of you done an inspection, it was occupied, but what if that property wasn't occupied? How would you approach that? So it's not a question outside of your experience, is a question of trying to gain an insight of how would you approach surveying as a whole when you are faced with certain things or uncertainties. But it's not a question of uncertainty per se. And I believe what that did in the end was it gave that candidate a bit of more confidence of what to look forward to. And as I said, even last minute, it was half an hour chat with this individual, and I could tell the sense of relief from her that she got from just speaking to somebody, obviously going via Lionheart and me getting involved with that. And I think that's a key sort of role that Lionheart plays to candidates. You can imagine this particular candidate, she's done 4 years university and she's coming to that penultimate point of going to an interview. And yet, in 30 minutes, she got that sort of relief of what to look for in an hour's interview. So it kind of put things into perspective in how important Lionheart is in terms of an organization and helping individuals progress through that journey.
That's lovely. Yeah, thank you, Roy. It was so nice to hear about that experience and how Lionheart helped that individual. We're coming to the end of our chat, which is a shame. It's always been lovely to talk to you. But if there are any candidates that are listening, and there's probably one bit of advice you could give them, having been through this whole process and now sitting on the other side of the fence, as it were, as an assessor, what's probably the one piece of advice that you would give to someone in that position right now?
A lot come to mind at the minute, but the one thing I will say, and it's something I live by, and I'm going to caveat this by saying that everyone revises differently. We're going to be bold and say that we got crammers. We got people that will sort of cram the night before. We got people that wait till that last moment. But I think what's very important is you need to revise using different platforms. And what I mean by that, you could read a number of books. You could go on the website and read a number of things. But things like podcasts, hearing that voice, hearing someone talk to you, things like YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube channels where they talk about various competencies, sort of measurements, inspection, or the mandatory competencies like client care, for example. Explore different platform of revision. Sort of get used to hearing that voice in your head, i.e., from a YouTuber talking to you or from a podcast, something like that. What it does, it kind of soothes the mind and it prepares you, whereby you're not just completely reading off the books, or be it the red book or be it the syllabus at university. You need to explore different platforms. It could be whilst you going to bed, get a headphone on, listen to client care, listen to accounting, listen to measurement inspection on YouTube. There are lots of different platforms and a lot of different networks available for that, even the RICS as well. So revision obviously is an important part of how you're going to progress, but I think it's important that you sort of break that cycle down a bit instead of just reading, listen, look at videos. That is quite useful. So that would be one of my top tips. As I said, there's a number of ways of people I've spoken to and feedback I've received. But I think that's the one key skill that you need to endeavor to sort of help you through that.
Roy, that's an amazing bit of advice. It has been wonderful to chat to you. And I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate all the support you give to us at Lionheart. And just a reminder to everyone that's listening, if there's anyone out there that's struggling with their mental health around the APC process, or really would like to reach out to the support team and get some help with practice around your presentation, we are always there. And in the show notes will be all of the different ways that you can get in contact with us. So it just remains to say, Roy, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. And I hope we get to speak to you again very soon.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure and always available for you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.